Okay.
Yay.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our second session of the Doing Justice series. And today we're going to talk about our systems and our structures. So as we gather for a few minutes in the group chat, for those of you who are with us last time, how have you experienced growth in doing justice since our last session? And for those of you who are brand new, why do you want to get better at doing justice? Give a couple of words into the group chat.
So this word cloud represents some of the words that the planning team identified that are associated with justice, and then some of the things that were identified in our last session for justice, because we know that justice can mean different things at different times and different circumstances for different individuals. So it is very fluid. And so we just wanted to see how perhaps if you were here last session that you have maybe even in some ways recognized injustice and recognized action toward justice in a new and different way. And then for those of you who are new, why are you here? Why are you here to learn how to get better at doing justice? One of our wonderful guest speakers today, said that one of the reasons why she wants to get better at doing justice is to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. And we're going to talk a little bit about how voice feeds into human dignity and belonging in community. And Barbara's keenly aware of justice issues and how they must be at the forefront. I love what you said about that too. That helps you to discern what opportunities are appropriate for you at that time. Yeah, because it can be overwhelming because there's so much that's coming at us. And so where do we begin or where do we go next is always a question I think we have to keep in mind. And Sandy, continue to understand, recognize those systems of injustice and how they developed and how deeply they're embedded. Yeah. Hi, Julie. It's nice to see a new face. Justice is part of healthy relationship. It emerges from communication, understanding, compassion. And we can't work without it.
Very true, very true.
Yeah. Barbara read the 1619 Project and found a greater awareness, understanding of systemic racism. That's a great resource that we should add in our books as well. Yes. And then Kathy, to learn how to take a more active role in promoting justice. That's great. All right. Thank you for playing along with that.
Yes, and for sharing. Thank you, everyone.
All right, Jamie, I think we're ready to.
I'm trying to get it to move. Why isn't it moving now? Sorry.
Oh, you have to click on it.
Here we go. So welcome. We welcome you to this time of being together and discussing a very intense but rewarding subject. In this process, we hope that you will be open to new perspectives, be authentic in your presence, be uncomfortable with being comfortable or comfortable with being uncomfortable, kind of being able to, I think Adele, the singer, said, sitting in your feelings for a little bit can help you work through the process. I love that when she said it. Be engaged in the conversation, and everyone is engaging already. We thank you for that. Be non-judgmental in your feedback and in your understanding. Row. Reba?
Yep.
Okay. And with us today, facilitating through this session, we have the Reverend Clara Kwan. He'll be bringing us our spiritual grounding here in a few moments. We've got Dr. Mike Davis from the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, who will be leading us through some wonderful teaching with Reba Collins, our very own All-In Community Consultant. And I am Jamie Nathan, the new Training and Ministry Coordinator for All-In Community. So thank you for being here today. We welcome you to this space. Today, we will develop a greater awareness of why and how systems and structures develop injustices within them. We're going to increase our understanding of participants' roles within systems and structures. And we're going to identify actions participants can take to address systemic and structural injustices. So as we begin our time together today, we are going to turn to Clara for some words of wisdom to kind of get us grounded and focused as we move through today. Miss Clara?
Thank you, Jamie. So somewhere in the Bible, early on in one of those books that we never read, God does something miraculous. God gives God's people instructions on how to be God's people. And that's what Leviticus is. It's all of the laws of God on how to be God's people, on how God has called God's people to be different and called to be a blessing to the nations. But most of us, I suspect, we don't like to read Leviticus because laws aren't fun for us. For some of us, we prickle at the word laws because we grew up free-spirited. We don't want to be boxed in by such rigid walls. And then there are others of us who have a much stronger and visceral reaction to the word laws, because those laws have always been used against them, because they have been used to chain them in injustice and to oppress them. And so today we want to surrender this word and this concept back to God. For God took even the greatest symbol of a criminal's death, the Roman crucifixion, and transformed it into the greatest symbol for new life, the cross of Jesus Christ. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, that transforming power of Jesus has been relegated. It's been shrunken down to just the individual soul, if that even. And many times we fail to recognize that God is big enough to change entire systems, entire ways of doing things. And that is the work that we are joining in today. Leviticus is not just a book of individual moral standards, but it details God's way of ordering life, social structures, and entire life cycles. Leviticus 25 describes to us how God structured the social system. Every week, God's people were to rest. Every 7 years, they were not to work the land and let it rest. And every 7 times 7 years, in the 50th year, there was supposed to be a Jubilee. During the Jubilee, all debts, and that is financial debts, were forgiven. The land that was sold under the duress of debts was to be returned back to its original owners. And this is something that God instituted. He structured it in the very way that God's people were supposed to live. And so imagine the implications. Not just economic, but the social and political implications if the land that you had were to be returned to its original owners. And just sit in that for a moment. If the land and the property that you had were to be returned to its original owners. And that's exactly what God is doing. Jubilee is not about individual rights and property ownership. Jubilee is about public and communal space, about land that does not belong to anyone, but land that belongs to God. And when land that is returned every 50 years, when debts are forgiven and debt slaves are freed, it disrupts everything. It disrupts wealth accumulation. It disrupts power structures. It disrupts everyday life. Everything is freed. Everything is reset. And so Jubilee, as it is written in Leviticus 25, is about liberation. It is about release. And God built that into the system. God commanded it. That is God's law. That there be a release. So imagine what it would be like to wait for that every 50 years. That once in a lifetime disruption that resets everything. As you might imagine, the ancient Israelites never practiced Jubilee. No one did until Jesus came along. In Luke 4, Jesus announces that he has come to release the people. His ministry was a ministry of Jubilee, to liberate people and to liberate lands. Jubilee is not about individual and personal salvation. It is about resetting and restoring God's order of the cosmos. And so God is inherently interested in how things are ordered and structured, because that's what God did when he created. Our Western thinking makes us think and see the creation story as how God birthed into being out of nothing. But that's not how the ancient Hebrew authors saw God's creative act. Creation to them was about ordering the chaos. God ordered the chaos so that life could thrive. And God ordered the social systems so that life could thrive. And so we do this justice work today, not only because the Holy Spirit leads us to social sanctification, but also because it is the very nature of God to order the systems, to contain the chaos so that life can thrive. Life can thrive, not just survive, not just be let alone to do its own thing, but so that life could thrive. God ordained and structured Jubilee. It was God's law. The liberation of land, of peoples that Jesus enacted with his ministry. And now we, as those who follow Jesus, are called to carry on the work which Jesus began. And so today, I hope that we will open ourselves up to see as God sees, to recognize that there are bigger structures at play here, and to believe that our God is big enough to do with them as God pleases. And so I pray that we will join God in the work to reset and restore the systems. I used this phrase in part of our planning sessions, and I think I finally remembered where I heard that phrase from. It was from my cultural competency training. But sometimes systems are hard to see. It's like describing water to fish. We're so enmeshed in the systems that we are in. But perhaps through this session today, we can learn to see, to recognize the systems, and to join with God in pronouncing Jubilee. Let us pray. All-powerful and creator God, we invite you in this space, in this time, in this moment in our lives. We ask for your grace to open our eyes, to open our minds, to open our hearts, and to open our ears. That you would pull back the curtain and let us see how you have structured and ordained all that is. That you are inviting us to bigger picture work. We pray for boldness and courage as we step out, that we step into the way that you have ordered things. Let us believe and live out that you are powerful enough, and big enough to change even the way that things have always been done. We surrender all of this to you. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Thank you very much, Clara. That was beautiful. Thank you very much. So to get our feet wet and start thinking through what we're doing today, we sent out a couple of questions for you to ponder to begin our discussion time together today. I'd like to start with, which community systems do you interact with or participate in on a regular basis? If you just want to popcorn out and give us an answer, that will get us started in our conversation. Feel free to unmute and just call it out and name it. Anybody want to share anything that they're involved with?
Well, I think of like community system of education in many ways, if young people in school. So participate in that. Participate in, well, we were just talking previous to this, around taking people to the doctors and things like that. So in our healthcare systems, participate in those quite often, unfortunately, but yeah, those are just a couple.
Church automatically comes to mind.
Because we are our own little communities, aren't we?
Yeah, and we have some systems that aren't necessarily just,
Mhm, mhm.
to say the least.
Some inequality working in there, yes. Anyone else? I know education is a big one for me, working with adults.
Well, Jamie, for me, you sort of said it in the intro. I work for the prison system, so on a daily basis, I'm embedded in aspects of the criminal justice system.
I'm in kind of an interesting situation. I just came to serve a new church as their pastor in a very small town. I've only been here a few months, but the town is so small that, for example, I went into the coffee shop yesterday morning and the mayor was there and she said, "Oh, hi, Pastor," and I sat down and ended up talking to the mayor about the community garden and some things that are going on with foster kids in town. And so I guess I'm sort of part of the political system in town, but it's all very informal and I'm still learning about it, but the potential here is really exciting.
It's another good example. Thank you, Julie, for sharing.
I think just
Was that Rick who was wanting to make a comment?
I think it was Alice.
Alice? So where are sources of inequity and oppression embedded in these systems that you participate in? I know for education, it's very hard. I work with English as another language for new language speakers. And I hate to say English is a second language anymore because so many of my students, this is their fourth, fifth, and sixth language that they're learning. And they all have degrees in their home country. So it's a very interesting system to watch work out and how they are being oppressed. Even with all of their education, they're coming to the United States and they're treated as less than, simply because they don't know English.
I work with a lot of students, middle school, high school, well, some elementary, but actually, yeah, just the whole gamut. And um, and I've developed a space for middle school and high school kids to hang out after school. And it's interesting, we tend to get kids that are on the fringe one way or another. And so just hearing their stories just of individual interactions with their peers. So I'm in Tip City, which is traditionally very white. I'm in Miami County, which is traditionally very conservative, and um, and so, in trying to create a safe space for everybody, I I evidently tend to attract um, those that don't feel like they fit in with the norm in this community, and just hearing their stories and just kind of floors me that here we are in the 21st century, and they're being treated, and things said to them, or just things done to them that are like seem so backward to me. But
Yeah. I live in a very, what would probably be considered a very affluent community. And a couple years ago, there was a deep dive in an article in the paper around, and like we have like all these national merit scholars and like 36 every year, something huge like that. But it came out that the young people of color in our school system, they voiced out that, hey, it's not all rosy here, and we experience this wonderful community of education much differently, and we're not really encouraged around taking classes for college prep or whatever. I can't remember what they're called because my kids have graduated, and it's like one of those things you got to let go of. But just whatever credits you can get to go into college ahead of time. So and I think that was very shocking, because if you look at our community, we are very ethnically diverse. We have a lot of different groups that are here because a lot work for P&G and GE, and it's international, more of an international community. But there's definitely, sources of inequity and oppression of access to different things in that. And then I think of healthcare. Every time I go to the doctor, I think of how much I benefit from my husband's insurance that allows me, I think nothing of making a doctor's appointment and nothing of needing to go get prescriptions and things like that, simply because of our economic level and what my husband's job has afforded me. And I know that there are communities that don't even have access to basic health care, and people have to make, life altering decisions and life decisions of whether they can afford medication or not. So the system, healthcare system itself, is certainly not equitable.
I started a youth choir this past fall, a community youth choir, and it was the initial interest was birthed from homeschool parents asking me if I would do something like that. And so we have a large group of homeschool kids, but also kids from local schools in a pretty big area. On the registration, I thought it would be appropriate to put a gender question, male, female, or now I don't even remember if I put other or prefer not to answer or whatever. And then I also listed preferred pronouns. Well, there was a big discussion on a homeschool parent group about asking the question of preferred pronouns, and some people did not participate because there was this thought that there was an agenda being pushed, when that was not at all the intent. The intent was to be respectful of all persons, but it was taken otherwise. But it still stays that way.
I think that goes right into that third question. How do you help maintain these systems of injustice, right? How do we help do that?
Exactly. And sometimes it's just in little subtle things that we don't almost understand until it's gone by, and then we recognize it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We just accept them kind of without question, because historically that's the way things have been practiced. And so we just sort of blindly go along, and then hopefully, well, later it comes to mind and then we do something, but it would be better if it came to mind a lot quicker.
That we've always done it this way.
Yes.
Here,
Yes.
specifically in churches, we've always done it this way. Yeah, that's one that just jumped right out at me for that.
Yeah, and it goes beyond, and it goes beyond the local church too. There are just a lot of things that are deeply embedded.
I think we do it as well when we deny or dispute people's experiences with the systems, right? Oh, that doesn't happen. Oh, you must have read that wrong, or whatever. Oh, no, that's not the way it is. When people are telling us that's what I experience as a member of this community, right? And so I think we definitely maintain it when we fall back on and go, oh, well, that wasn't my experience, so therefore your experience is invalid.
And not that we just deny it. Sometimes we don't even listen. We just
I just wanted to chime in. I saw in the chat earlier, I think it was Mindy who talked about the need to do justice in order that all voices are heard, and I think that's where a lot of this lies, that injustice is allowed to thrive because we silence the voice of others. And so from seats of privilege or advantage, we kind of speak to our experience, as you so well said, and we silence the other. In talking about the polarization of our nation, how dare we listen to other voices? And so injustice thrives when we remain silent ourselves and we refuse to listen to the voices of others.
So then, to Clara's beautiful unpacking of Leviticus, how do Scripture, and for those of you who are United Methodist, how do the social principles challenge us to participate in creating systems and structures, creating better, more just systems, or challenging the unjust systems and structures? And I think Clara said a lot. She definitely made that point. But how else does Scripture challenge us?
I think Clara really, she hit upon this partly when she talked about that it's just not personal. And that's one of the things I love about the United Methodist Church, is that it's not just personal, but social holiness. And the social principles really name that very clearly. And of course, the Bible speaks to that, all throughout, really.
Okay.
Are Baptists allowed to speak? I know
Yeah.
these are the United Methodist social principles, but as a Baptist, I'm certainly challenged by Scripture. As we've talked, I think during the first installment of the series, that we're required to do justice, and there are benefits to us, for all of us, in doing justice. That the well-being of my brother and my sister should matter to me, and I think that comes through in the biblical text, that there's a requirement to do it, and so thank you for allowing that Baptist moment to infringe in the UMC there.
We appreciate it. We appreciate it, Mike. Thank you. Thank you. And with that, I think we'll move right into more wonderful words from Dr. Davis and Ms. Reba.
Yeah. So, so I think one of the things that we have to wrap our minds around is this thing about human dignity, right? And that systems and structures and engagements and relationships and organizations that do not pay attention to human dignity at the core of human relationships are then perceived and sensed as feeling unjust. So, so when we talk about human dignity, there's been a lot of research that's been done around this, and I love this article. It's a white paper called "A Science of Human Dignity: Belonging, Voice, and Agency as Universal Human Needs," by John Bailey from the International Institute for Restorative Practices. And so he looked at a lot of literature. He's looked at a lot of research. He's looked at scripture and several different theological texts and forms in that way. And just it kind of boiled it down to there are these three components to human dignity: the need to belong in community, to have voice in what happens to us. Right? We feel that our dignity is diminished whenever we don't feel like anybody's listening to us and we haven't been heard. And then the exercise of agency in one's own affair. So whenever we feel our dignity is diminished, when we don't have the ability to determine what is to be, right? And so when we think about that as far as future tense, think of hopelessness as being that time when we have no say in our future, right? And so human dignity is really important whenever we start looking at our human systems that have been constructed to order our communities. And so as part of our United Methodist social principles, one of the things is that we do believe we have that responsibility to innovate and sponsor and evaluate new forms of community. And that's what we're talking about as far as systems and structures go. And so that the full potential in individuals, right, our full dignity can come out and be expressed and be honored and be held with sacred worth, right? So as United Methodist, and I would say even as our Baptist friend, because he definitely believes in this, that we need to be supporting social climates in which human communities are maintained and strengthened. And in your guidebook, John Bailey unpacks a little bit more about how that sense of injustice plays out as it relates to belonging and voice and agency, in that whenever we feel in community or in organizations or whatever that we don't belong. And that, the flip side of that is whenever we feel oppressed or whenever we feel like we don't have access to. So whenever we feel that systems and structures were not designed for our betterment, but for the betterment of others, then we feel we may not be able to express it, but it's unjust. It feels unjust, and it is unjust. So when we think of systems and structures, how we intersect with those, how we bump up against those is really important, and how those serve as barriers to belonging and relationship and healthy relationship, right? So that's just something that we need to keep in mind. So Jamie, next slide. Mike, did you have anything to add before we move on to them?
No, Reva, that was really good. Thank you.
Thank you. So whenever we've said that this is about systems and structures, and so we're just going to kind of, Mike actually is going to give you just kind of a little bit of framing of what we mean by that, and what are some of the systems and structures and how they work. So Jamie, keep rolling there. So as Methodists, just in general, as Methodists, one part of our social principles lines up very, very nicely with this thing called the social determinants of health. And Mike's going to kind of unpack that for just a little bit to kind of explain it, and to then, if you haven't ever intersected with this particular model for systems and structures in community, and then how injustice embedded in these actually is something we need to be paying attention to. So Mike.
All righty. Thanks, Reba. So I again work for the adult prison system here in Ohio, and something that's been true and has existed, for time immemorial, is the fact that the characteristics and structures of community greatly impact the wellness of those that live in the community. And as it relates to those in prison, certainly is found to be a determinant as to whether or not they'll be successful in their return. The thing that really happened over the past couple of years, as you know, sort of everything was sort of exacerbated relative to community conditions. Certainly, things were put under the microscope. And what you see here are these categories or structural factors or characteristics that exist in community that, when operating well, when stabilized, serve to promote wellness for all the inhabitants of community. And so for years, as far back as the 1940s, with Shaw and McKay, who developed the sort of the concept of social disorganization, that attempted to explain why certain communities always seem to do poorly. We understand it is the characteristics of community, the destabilized nature of these characteristics that you see before you. In addition to that, the cascading effects of these systems on each other across disciplines and their collective impact on the community. When these things are destabilized, communities cannot function in a way that promotes wellness and health. This is where we see a lot of injustice. As I mentioned, with the prison system, when men and women who are incarcerated get more access to health care, to behavioral health, when they get more access to educational opportunities than they would in community, there is a significant problem. The social determinants of health are a good gauge to determine whether or not we're moving toward wellness or we're continuing in social disorganization. So for this chart, I have to give a shout out to the Governor DeWine for putting together a committee that looked at the social determinants of health, how the COVID-19 pandemic was disproportionately impacting persons of color. Again, these things existed prior to the pandemic, but certainly the conditions that existed, those structural factors and their cascading effects certainly were put under the microscope during the pandemic. And we understand that these independent yet interconnected structural factors serve to determine how well our communities are doing.
So next slide, Jamie. So what happens when those systems, each of those categories, the systems and the structures that have been in place have the embedded and inherent injustice in them? This is what happens, is too many of our community members are left behind. And we don't want to go into too much detail about this, but this is just I guess, an illustration of the reality that there are things that are at play, and that the myth that we've been taught in many of our circles, particularly for people of privilege, is that, well, if you just work hard enough, if you just go to school, if you just go to college, if you just work hard enough, you will get ahead. But the reality is there are some systems, some people in our common systems are being left behind because of how those systems are structured. So, Mike, do you want to say anything else, and then we'll move on?
Well, yeah, just that this slide comes from the Health Policy Institute of Ohio. They maintain a lot of good data relative to this. And Reba, as you said, so these ratings are out of 50. 1 is you're doing well, 50 is at the bottom of the range. And so we see where Ohio is relative to things like child poverty. And so, as was mentioned before, we come from a state that is very diverse. We have a lot of affluent areas, a big metropolitan areas, a lot of Appalachian and rural areas. And so when it all balances out, we rank 35 out of 50 as it relates to child poverty. And it's interesting, the connection between adverse childhood experiences. We rank 38, and we also rank 38 in adult incarceration. And for those who intersect with the prison system at all, or those, I think Barbara mentioned, talking about at-risk youth, they tend to have more adverse childhood experiences. Our population in prison is filled with people who have had these difficult circumstances in their growing up. Thanks, Reba.
Yep.
And so Mike, just to go over the numbers, if we were the best, there would be a 1 there.
That's
if we were
correct.
The worst, we'd be 50.
That's correct.
So the fact that we're in 20s, 30s, 40s means that we're toward the bottom of all those.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Yeah. So those with the least amount of childhood poverty would be 1. Right. And
Yep.
we have, okay. Yep. All right. Next slide. So when we think about doing justice through our systems and structures, right? We obviously, the last couple slides have shown us that there's plenty of opportunity for us to do justice. And in the face of that reality, and I think people sense it. They just respond to it in different ways. Some deny it, some ignore it, some aggressively try and go after it, and then some just are what I call passive acceptance of it, right? So in our churches, and this is going to challenge some of us, is I feel like, and from the work I do with Mike with the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, that well, first let me say that in America, 1 in 3 Americans hold a felony record. Okay, 1 in 3 Americans. And I say that because this is and bumping up and work and being in the criminal justice system is not it is a very common experience. People in our congregations have this lived experience. But as folks who are trying to, and as I try and lead our churches toward this ministry of doing justice, particularly around the criminal justice system, I wouldn't say a lot of outright pushback, but just a lot of passive acceptance or just kind of this denial or ignoring of it. And so I think we have, as Bishop Palmer said at the leadership clinic today, we have become concerned with our prerogatives and less concerned about our responsibilities. And so what does that look like? How do we normally, or how are we operating in our congregations that perhaps are not really moving us toward doing justice? So Mike and I came up with this graph around, types of ministry that we often see in our congregations, faith-based ministry, benevolent ministry, and then what we're calling justice ministries. And then then at the bottom, it's like, what is the impact of each one of those, right? And so around community harm, around aftercare and repair, or around prevention. And prevention is when we are actually changing the systems for justice, right? We're embedding more just systems. And so, Jamie, you'll have to click through these. So, I think a lot of us sit with this very low level of complexity and connection and collaboration on both spectrums. And we'll do prayer vigils for victims if there's a horrific crime that has occurred in the community. I'm thinking of the shooting in Dayton, of the mass shooting in Dayton, and there's one every day, it seems like. And so what do? We respond with, prayer vigils for the victims and the family and the community. Or we might do next click there, Jamie. We may look at something in our community and go, you know what, if people just had access to clothes and ride shares or bus passes, that, that's going to help them get where they need to be, right? For flourishing. And then sometimes we kind of isolate, or we kind of just do it around a person. And we do the faith-based, and we do the prayer vigil, and they were like, you know what, maybe they could use some food or help or just somebody to sit in presence with them. And so we do the benevolent ministry. And then, oh my gosh, now they're involved in the justice system as witnesses to this crime. And so then we do advocacy work around that. And that's just, but that's contained to like an individual or a small group, family group. Or then I think there's one more, Jamie. Or then we may box ourselves in and just do this advocacy around the systems themselves without really thinking about and being with the people that the systems are impacting. And so we think we're preventing injustice from occurring in the community at probably a larger scale than we really are. And so this is kind of where and Mike and I, when we were developing this model, we're kind of like, these are kind of the patterns we see in our congregations. And Mike, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Just Reva, and I think the chart gives illustration of the differences and distinctions between maybe what we see in Luke chapter 10 and the response to the victim by the Good Samaritan, right? That they were intent on helping the person, and that's necessary, but it's not addressing the totality of systems that foster the need for what people want to live a good quality of life.
Yeah. So this may, hopefully what this does is help you kind of realize maybe where you're sitting at this point within your congregation or as a leader of a group of people, where are you and how are you really doing justice through systems and structures. And then the next slide is kind of, it's an ministry evaluation tool. And what does it really look like and mean to do justice? So next click there, Jamie. So it's really about, Bible study with, to and for and with particular groups of people, and benevolent ministry, right? With and to and for people. And it's about the systems, right? So why is it that people keep having to come back to your community meal? What are the systems and structures at play that are keeping people having to return and be dependent upon your ministry at your church, right? So justice ministry is looking beyond just the people that are coming to our congregations or the people that we are serving in the community and going out to and providing not only spiritual support, but tangible support. Justice ministry is really about these bigger things that are keeping people stuck. So Mike, anything else to add? And then I think our time is off.
Yeah, I better hurry. So let me just say this, from a Christian perspective, doing justice is required, but doing justice is difficult. Doing justice is unpopular. You're going to lose friends doing justice because it gets at the root of inequity. It's going to get at the root of disparities and racism and gender bias and ageism and all of those things. But when we look at the scripture, we are told in Micah 6:8, and we are reminded again by the Lord Jesus in Matthew 23:23, that we are required to do justice.
Okay. So now we're going to transition and bring in our two guest interviewees, Mindy Yoakum, who's out of Columbus, Ohio, the Columbus Central Ohio area. And Mindy is the CEO of the Justice Mobile. And I can't wait for her to tell you how this came to be and what the Justice Mobile does. I was able to connect with Mindy through one of our United Methodist community ministers, Gwen Stetler, who serves as the executive director for Family Promise of Delaware County. And Mindy is the new president of the board for Family Promise. And she's a lawyer, obviously. I don't know, obviously, but she is a lawyer there in the Columbus area. And then Dawn Hayashi is representing and is very, very much involved in the Dayton chapter Japanese American Citizens League. But Dawn has spent many years doing work in the United Methodist Church at all different levels around social injustice. And so he brings this wealth of knowledge and information with that intersection of faith and community and social justice. I will say Don is retired, but he's open to speaking engagements. And so I'm just excited to hear from both of these folks. And so we are going to just bring them on now to just, I'm going to, how we're going to do this is we're just going to do a couple of questions to them, and then we will open it up for discussion. All right. So Jamie, I'm seeing a great big Mike Davis on my screen. Am I doing something wrong here?
Do you have him pinned?
There we go. Excellent. All right. Now we can see everyone. Not that I don't like to look at Mike, but need to find other people. Need to find other people here. All right. So I will begin with Mindy. I would just tell the group, how did you come to do the work that you are doing, and talk a little bit about the work that you're actually doing.
Okay, and thank you all for having me. This has been great so far. I'm learning a lot, so thank you for that. And I'm excited. Justice is like my life, but I don't always think of it in the various aspects that you're addressing it. So that's exciting too. So yes, my name is Mindy. I am an attorney. I'm an older person, but a newer attorney. I graduated from law school in 2015, so not too long ago. To back up a little bit and give you a little bit of background about how I got to this work, I'll make it the short, longer version of the story, but I am from up by Mansfield, but my husband and I lived in Florida for a bit, and he was working, I was pregnant, had a 2-year-old at home, and he was attacked at work and hurt pretty badly, stabbed many times and left for dead, and luckily survived that attack. But it sort of shifted our lives forever, that one moment, that one choice that someone else made. So he ended up dealing with workers' compensation and Social Security disability and navigating those systems, which are awful and difficult and full of bureaucracy. And we ended up losing our home, our health insurance, all of the things. It was a really terrible time. And I was a graduate of the Ohio State University at that time, and I thought I was a pretty smart person, but trying to navigate these systems proved to be very difficult, overwhelming, dealing with people who didn't feel like they were listening or understood the situation that we were in was also frustrating. So I just kept getting like more mad, just more mad in general. But I tried to start learning how the systems work and trying to help others navigate these systems, because I did not want other people to feel what I had felt and what my family had to go through. And so fast forward, my husband is with me and doing well. So just for that. And my youngest is 18 and my oldest is in college. So all blessings. But we moved back to Ohio, and I decided to go to law school so I could change the system, obviously. So I worked during the day and went to law school at night and graduated in 2015, opened my own firm. So I'm a general practice attorney. I have a firm in Columbus, and then more recently I opened an office up in my hometown, Shelby. And what I really wanted to do was make sure that everyone had access to legal resources and legal education, because I really truly feel that justice and the legal system should be more of a social service. More people should understand their rights than they do. So I started offering sliding scale fees based on income, and trying to sort of figure out how I could reach more people. And I started partnering with the library, Action for Children, different social agencies, going on site and just saying, hey, if you got legal questions, come ask me. I'll see what I can do to help you. And that continued to grow. I continued to work to serve more people. So I still have my law firm, but I also have a nonprofit now called the Justice Mobile, which is a giant RV. It's 37 foot, and we go on location. We partner with a lot of great Methodist churches. Actually, we go to Bell Fountain, Short North Church, Whitehall, and I feel like I'm forgetting one. But during their community meals, or when there's community resource fairs or things like that, we partner with agencies and nonprofits to provide legal resources to people who might not traditionally have that access. That was a long answer. I'm so sorry. I'm sure you have more questions.
No, that is good. That is good. In our interview, you said, or not in our interview, but just in our discussion, you said that somewhat the breaking point, or maybe the aha for you, was that you realized that these systems that were supposed to be helping you were hurting you.
100 million % correct. And I won't get into the weeds of all of it, but there's a lot of misconceptions about if somebody gets hurt and it's not their fault, what happens. And especially if you worked all your life and you're doing well and everything else is going okay. but no, the workers' comp system was very flawed. My husband was in bad shape, and they were coming to the hospital asking when he could return to work. And Social Security disability, it took us 4 years to get benefits. So we were in a position where we couldn't do anything except try to navigate these systems, and they just kept failing us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. So Dawn, same question. How did you come to the work? And my goodness, how did you stay in it so long?
Well, I gave some thought to this, and I think one of the incidents that happened was when I was probably about 6 years old. But we were visiting my grandparents and learned that they were going to be going to school again. Now, my grandparents were retirement age at that point, but the US government finally allowed Japanese Americans to become naturalized American citizens. So my grandparents went to citizenship school. I was a first grader at the time, and I thought, this is really weird to have grandparents going to school just like me. But, in the late 1800s, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called Ozawa versus the US that because Japanese and Asians were not free white citizens, free white people, that they could not become American citizens. The Emancipation Proclamation and the amendments to the Constitution allowed African Americans to be considered citizens, but not people that were not white nor black. And so through my growing up, it was impressed on me the importance of citizenship and voting. And that kind of went through me. And frankly, the Japanese American Citizens League National Organization was founded basically by American-born Japanese, of proving that they were good citizens of the United States. Now, when I was in junior high, I went to a junior high that had a lot of different kids, black, white, yellow, brown, name it. But in the student body, there were a number of Jewish students. And the reason was that there was a new housing development in the school district that no longer had housing covenants. So Asians, Jews, Native Americans, and others could move into that area. And so many of these families went to that junior high because housing had opened. And I didn't realize it at the time, but as I reflect on it now, how that really enriched my life in so many ways to have that mingling, that intersection. And then, of course, we went through the 60s and the 70s with civil rights, with the Vietnam War, with other things like this. And realizing that systems have the potential of doing good, but we don't always measure up in that way. And so when I had to choose a pathway out of college, I was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War. So I had to do 2 years of service in lieu of going into the military. And so I worked at a church-related group, helping to organize poor whites to basically improve their lives. And so through most of my career, I worked either through, almost entirely with nonprofits, but much of it through the church, because I recognized that the church was one place that had the potential of making a difference in people's lives.
So how have you sustained? I don't want to call out age. I don't want to be, ageism, but how have you sustained all this? I mean, what feeds you, Dawn?
Well, I think, number one, I enjoy being with people and I enjoy doing service. And so I've been retired now for 8 years. I'm in my mid-70s, but I feel like it's important for me to give because so many others have given for me. And I recognize that, there are things that need correction, that need change. And if I can be a part of that, I want to do that. And if I can help to guide and lead others to join with me in that movement, I want to be a part of that. Right now, we're working on legislation to try to include Asian American history in school curriculum here in the state of Ohio. Right now, the law says that history for K through 12 needs to be inclusive of African American history, Mexican history, Puerto Rican history, Native American history. Absolutely no mention of Asian Americans or Pacific Islanders at all. And I think that's a real shortcoming because as an Asian American, I'm often asked, so how long have you lived in our country? And if I can help them to understand that I was born here, I was raised here, and usually their second statement is, but you speak English good. Well, English is really the only language I learned. I can understand a little bit of Japanese, but if you ask what I'm fluent in, it's English.
Wow. Okay, thank you. Thank you both. I think you also answered my second question. So third question is, as we've been talking about, our systems and structures are so inherent in our ecosystem, in our community ecosystems, that we just participate in. We're not often aware of them, even whenever they are oppressing us. In some conversations I've had with people of color, it's like, until they realize that, right, that there are reasons why you've not been able to get a job, and your community has not been invested in, right, those kind of things. So but when we become aware, we often become overwhelmed by their complexity. And as I'm sure, Mindy, you experienced, you were just even as a highly educated person, you were overwhelmed by the complexity. And then that, I think, makes us pause, if not completely stop and think about, perhaps we don't approach it this way, but our insignificance in being able to change that system, right? It's so complex. There's so much to it. I'm just a little old me, right? What difference can I make in that, kind of that David versus Goliath? So how do you give us some tips on how you approach doing justice through the systems and structures that you're working with? I mean, where have you been able to feel like you've been able to push past that and really feel like you're impacting that system in new ways?
Well,
Disrupting it or whatever.
that, the legal system, the legal portion of the justice system is so complex, and there's so many different variables. And I am not the type of person to think that I cannot change it. So that taking that out. So number one, I'm just like, I'm going to fix it. And that's the end of it. But, when I was struggling and when I was going through sort of our issues, which everyone has similar types of issues, I recall, so, and this is, I'm going to digress probably, but, I told you I was pregnant, and my mother-in-law's coworkers got together and bought us clothes for the little one. And I think about that every week. I think about that one person who took that additional step for me, who did not know me, but understood the struggle and believed in me. So that is sort of the focus that I take. Each person I meet, I want them to know that I understand them and that I'm going to advocate for them in whatever manner I'm capable of doing. And that brings me great satisfaction, but also I know that they're going to carry that feeling with them. On the other hand, just systematically, my goal is to set the example. So I want other attorneys who are coming up through law school or whatever they're doing to understand that I'm an attorney. I am still feeding my family. I am still successful, but I am able to go out into the world and help others in this manner and affect change and hopefully inspire some others to do the same.
Thank you. Same question, Dawn.
Well, you know, the challenges are enormous, but are there some things that we can begin to do to make life more livable for others? Are there some steps we can take? Now, some of that, frankly, is more benevolence than social justice. But today I have on blue and yellow because I want to be in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. Because even though I'm thousands of miles away, I feel that we need to do so. And frankly, through the United Methodist Church, through UMCAR, we are doing a bundle of good there, and we need to continue that on. But beyond that, are there systems within our government that really could be much more responsive, that could be much more caring? Dayton is considered a welcoming city, but what are we doing to help to bring in refugees? How are we helping them to understand our systems in a way that they can operate? And, much of this stuff is very simple stuff. My mother, in her last several years of life, she was a home economist, but she saw that there were some women in her church who were recent immigrants from Japan. Most of their husbands worked for Japanese corporations, which meant they went to work at 7 in the morning and didn't come home till past 11 o'clock at night. And so these women were left at home by themselves, raising children. And so they begged my mother to teach them how to cook American food. And so if I would go see her on Mondays, we'd go to the grocery store and she'd have to get things, and she would put together menus. They would cook together at the church, and then they would get the recipes, and they would see the cans and the boxes that they came in, so that when they went to the grocery store, they could identify what they needed to get. So, part of justice is just equipping people to be able to do for themselves. And there certainly are institutions there that prevent that and that hold us up. But we need to begin to listen to those that are in need and saying, what is it that I can do to make a difference in your life? How can I make life better for you? And I think it's that simple question.
May I just follow up with another thought?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
I just want to thinking more about your question and how to take action. I think what you and Dr. Davis outlined with the graphs is so important, because I think for me, I try to remain as flexible and nimble as possible so I can continue to evolve and make sure that I'm serving people in the best and most efficient way. And I think what you outlined is so important. A lot of us have an idea of what we think is going to help people, but when we step back and look at the larger picture, it was spot on when we need to identify, why are these people continuing to come to our community dinners? It's great that we're providing them, but how can we make it so we never see them again, or they only come for church on Sunday and they're doing well, or whatever it is. So I think taking those additional steps or providing those additional resources when you can, that is why I focus so much on partnering with other folks, because when I see people, I may never see them again. So I want to provide as much assistance as I can while they're on site. So I think that was very impactful for me from your part of the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. I have a few more questions, but we are bumping up on time. I want to ask our other participants if you have questions of Dawn and Mindy, or just a riff you may have about a thought that's churning in your mind, because this is a collective learning community. Thoughts?
Hey, Mindy, this is Mike. I'm so glad you could join us. Your reputation as an attorney who fights for the people, it precedes you, and I'm hoping, on a side note, hoping I can connect you to my daughter, Tristan, who's over at Capitol right now. But one of the things I wondered, as it relates to the justice system, we see so much disparity, and it seems as though it's impacting poor people at a greater rate. So despite what happens, that poor people go to jail, and if you can afford it, you get off the hook. And I just wondered if you had a thought about things that we could do as community members to ensure there's more balance in the system. What steps might we take to ensure more equity and balance and fairness?
Right. And so I don't know if we've ever met. Your rotation procedure as well. So I'm happy to meet you. An excellent question. I think this all the time. And that's partially why I'm doing the work that I do, because again, I don't feel like you should be at a disadvantage just because you have less money. That is not how the system should work. One of the things that I think I encounter most often is just how uneducated folks are about the legal system, and not just criminal stuff. What do I do if I get pulled over? But if you have a child, or you're getting divorced, or someone is evicting you, or things like that. So personally, I think education would be great. The Ohio State Bar Association provides high school students. Schools can request they come, and provides high school students with education about normal legal issues that you're going to encounter as a young adult. I think more education like that. I think, just that understanding, but it's so difficult and complex. I can't be everyone's attorney. So until we reach a point where the justice system or the legal system is truly a social service, we're just going to have to find different ways to navigate around and make sure everyone has access. But I think the broad answer is more education. If you in your ministry can invite attorneys or people like that to come in, I think, and I'm rambling, so I'll stop. An attorney, right? I think a lot of people are hesitant to even talk to attorneys because they're intimidated. It's going to cost money or things like that. So one of my other big drivers is creating relationships and making it seem less scary, so that we can be proactive about issues instead of always dealing with arrest warrants down the road.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I think the proactive leads to the preventive.
Yes. If you can identify something early, it is so much easier to deal with. Yes.
Yep, it does. All right. Any other questions?
To mind for me, as I just think about the immensity of these issues, and you spoke to that earlier, just that it can be so overwhelming, and that's for me looking at it, hoping to be effective in navigating some kind of change. What about those people that are caught in the midst of all of this? How overwhelming. And I don't think about that as much, I guess, as I do from my perspective, but how overwhelming for people who don't even know what questions to ask, don't even know what their needs are, don't have the slightest inkling how to begin some sort of change, and not only don't know where to start, but are so beaten down that they don't even have the hope to do that.
Yeah. Well, I think of that, the first part of that slide that model that Mike and I showed of, and on that one side, you have, that relationship, to Mindy's point, that relationship. And then you see, as you develop the love for that person, you see, oh, here's a need. Oh, here's a system, here's a structure. And I think if you're a leader within a congregation, one of the best things you can do is to tell those stories, right? Is as an advocate, it's not just advocating to help somebody navigate a system. It is exposing the system as the leader and saying, this is just one example, but it's not the only one. It is, Barbara, tapping into the recognition that there's a lot of people that are overwhelmed in their situations. And as people that probably are not in that situation, but have a little higher level of privilege or access or whatever, we can do things about that together. We can come together and do things about that.
And as you say, telling the stories, it's astonishing to me how many people truly care, truly have a heart for this, but really had no idea what other people are going through. And I've been telling a wonderful story, and I can't remember the comedian's name. He's an African-American comedian on he used to be on that Jon Stewart show. But he told a story about going into Best Buy to buy a case for his phone. And the person asked him, "Do you want a bag?" And he said, "Yes, I want a bag, because if I walk out of this store with a small item in my hand and it's not in a bag, I could end up getting shot in your parking lot." And then they said, "Well, do you want the receipt in your bag or in your hand?" "I want the receipt in my hand, and I'm not going to put this receipt away until I'm driving off your lot, because if your security guard stops me, asks me for my receipt, and I reach in somewhere, I could end up getting shot in your parking lot." And I've told that story to many, privileged white people around me, and they're just stunned, but also very caring, realizing that they've really learned something important about the world. And yeah, it's incredibly important to tell these stories, because people really don't know. It's not that they don't care, it's that they don't know.
Yeah. I like what your point there of they've learned something important about the world, right? It expands. And I think if we can lean into that, I'm a big believer that words build worlds. And as Dawn was talking and giving the history of how, Japanese Americans were excluded from certain things, I didn't know that. And whenever we think about how we talk about diversity, right, we often just talk about white and people of color. And I just thought, well, Dawn, you probably don't consider yourself a person of color, right? I mean, so.
No, I am a person of color.
Okay.
But we're all colorful.
Yes, we are. All, yeah. So, but I think in at least in my white brain, I don't think of our of different ethnicities beyond probably, Black, African, and Latin American. Right. I don't think of that. So anyway, it's just one of those mind shifts. All right. We have about 3 minutes left. We want to honor your time and be just in doing that. So Jamie, can you quickly put up the PowerPoint? And we'll just quickly, and it's in your book as well. I guess we don't really have to put it up if you have the book before you, but wanted to provide you with, next slide. First, can we do a hand thing of praise for Dawn and Mindy and thanking them for coming today? Thank you all. So this is just a moving toward justice. It's a justice mapping tool that might be able, that was designed, let's say it was designed to help you kind of start to look at your community a little differently, and the systems and structures, and get beyond just the people who are coming into your congregation or that you're going out and serving, and getting beyond just their needs, and really looking at what is available in my community. And there is a big distinction in my book between what is available in the community and then what is accessible to the community's most vulnerable, or to everybody in the community. And I always like to use education, right? Because most communities have some availability of education for our young people. But if a young person has to walk 3 blocks, that on a daily basis is where high crime is happening or there's gun violence that is happening, then really that educational environment is not accessible to them. So those are the things too that we have to look at is, yeah, this might be available and we can say, oh, we're going to invest in this neighborhood and give them, all these different things. But if there are laws around who can live there and who cannot, and if you have to have a job to live there and jobs aren't accessible or available in your community, then really housing isn't accessible to those community members. So we got to get deeper than just looking at what is structurally there or what we can visibly see. Okay, so next slide. Yeah, we're going to move on. Thank you. So then action steps toward justice. There are 3 action steps we can do. And that's 1, explore your own story and that of your neighbors and communities. And hopefully we've done that, just some of that today, just through talking with Dawn and Mindy and the rest of you as well. You've shared your stories and how that has helped you see the world in different ways. And then authenticate the issues affecting the community is really, really important. Why, again, going back to why do people keep coming back for services that we are providing in our congregation or that services that we're providing as community members? So what are those barriers or what are those systems and structures that are keeping people stuck in a cycle where they're unable to thrive? And then co-learn and co-labor with community members. And that involves those that are directly impacted and those that are not, right? And so how do we help? I don't even want to say help, but how do we create this mutual learning and co-laboring with our community members and seeing that our community members are more than those people that we know, that those are the people that we don't know, but that we need to know and that we need to care for even when we don't know them, right? So, Mike, this was part of yours as well. Did you have anything else to add to that?
Reva, I better not for time considerations. I think that's good. I think, as you mentioned, start with who you know. I think it's important that we develop a relationship and we continue to desire to improve and get better. And that comes with learning, with desiring to learn, with being devoted to learning and being determined to move forward.
Yep. So we're at 2:31. But if anybody has any final thoughts, either one of our guest speakers or anybody else, again, this is a mutual learning community. So any final thoughts? And if you need to bug off, then absolutely feel free to do that.
I think I would like to make a note just for everybody who's in attendance that our next session in this series is going to be July 7th at 1 o'clock. And we're going to be talking about doing justice through our service.
Ooh.
Through our service. So putting
Yeah,
the pedal to the metal, so to speak.
that's good. That's good.
On the ground.
And your book has a challenge to grow, right? So we're not going, if we don't challenge ourselves, we're not going to grow. And that's one way that we can continue to perpetuate good justice and doing the right things. So we appreciate you being here. Thank you again to Dawn and Mindy for leading us and telling your story and pouring into us and helping us change the world then in new ways. And so thank you all for coming. Again, Jamie, you'll follow up with registration for the next session and all those kind of things. And then, and Barb has actually posted, thank you, Barb, for that. Another resource for us to consider digging into as well. So blessings to you all. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and we'll see you in July.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.